All right, we're good to go. So I'm here tonight on Wednesday night. Is it Wednesday?
Yeah.
With Pam Galloway. And we're going to ask some questions here. I'm going to ask some questions. Pam hopefully will have some answers that I think will be of interest to Nisly Prayer Page partners. Pam has been a Wisconsin state senator. She has run for Congress. We've known each other since 2014, working on the Nisly campaign. And the reason why I thought of asking her questions is Curt Nisly would say, Pam, that you're the one that really taught him how to win. So I know you were the campaign manager. No, you were the campaign chairman.
Right, I was the campaign committee chairperson.
Yeah, chairperson. And then Dan Teeley was the campaign manager. And I was kind of a gopher for Dan. But we want to get into what you taught Curt. But before we do that, how about if you fill in a little bit more? Tell us about your medical background. That's going to relate to some of the questions I ask you later. So give us a little bit more of a bio.
Okay.
So you know who you are.
Well, I graduated from medical school in 1980, and I did a pathology residency and worked as a pathologist for a while, and then developed an allergy to formaldehyde. And I actually did a lot of research when I was a pathologist into Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And then when I developed that allergy to formaldehyde, I decided to retrain in surgery. So I did a surgery residency from 91 to 96. Then I practiced surgery in Ohio, which is where I did my residency. And it was a very hostile environment to practice medicine because of the tort laws there, the trial lawyers and so forth. So we moved to Wisconsin in 2003 to continue to practice medicine in a friendlier environment. So I actually didn't get politically involved until 2002, which is when we tried to, it was a medical malpractice issue that got us involved in politics. And so I really got involved relatively late in life. And so then in 2003, we moved to Wisconsin, and I practiced medicine until 2010, when I decided to focus on my race for state senate.
Okay. And then when did you move to Indiana?
We moved to Indiana in 2012. We had some sick family members in Illinois and Virginia, so we decided to split the difference.
All right, so now let's go forward just a couple more years. We're now 2014, and maybe you don't remember all these details, but how did you meet Curt? Or I guess what I'm really thinking about was I got involved probably in Curt's campaign in March of 2014. So you were well established. I came in late. There were people that probably had been working on this for about a year. At what point did you get involved? Did Curt become the candidate and then you got involved, or were you involved with a team and then Curt became the candidate?
No, I got involved and then Curt became the candidate. And I can't remember exactly when was the first time I met Curt, but I know that Monica Boyer ran into him in Wabash. And I can't remember all the details of the meeting, and that was how Curt first got on the radar screen. And so then I met with Curt and John Elliott, who was an integral part of the team. And at that point, Curt had developed 3 budgets, depending upon how much money he was able to raise, a motto or a slogan, which is "Free People Limit Government," and also a color scheme. He picked orange because it jived with the colors of the Warsaw High School. So he actually was very involved and active in the campaign from the beginning. And you say we selected him. Well, he selected us too, because he didn't have to run. And so fortunately, he did make that commitment. Yeah.
So I already said it. He credits you largely for helping him win. So what did you teach him?
Well,
what are 2 or 3 things that you thought were key that you imparted to Curt to help him win?
Well, number one was the sense of determination to win. And believe it or not, and I'm not going to name any names, but I've met a couple of candidates for different political offices here in Kosciuszko County over the past few years who actually said that they don't really care if they win. I didn't say anything, but what I was thinking was, well, why are you wasting people's time?
Exactly. And money.
Right, exactly. And so number one would have been the determination to win. Number two was our door-to-door plan, which I think most people who are actively involved in the campaign are familiar with. But that door-to-door campaign came about from two elements. Number one was, I'm sure that was why I won my state Senate race in Wisconsin. And at local levels, door-to-door campaigns are very doable because you don't have a great deal of territory to cover. The other was, and a lot of people, even in the campaign, don't remember this or weren't even aware of it, but at some point very early on, maybe even before Curt declared, but very, very early on, I met with Bill Rupel, who was the incumbent that Rebecca Kubacki defeated. So remember, it was our unhappiness with Rebecca Kubacki that prompted us to seek out Curt. But anyway, I met with Bill Rupel and talked to him about his campaign, that last campaign, and he said that about 2 weeks before Election Day, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce sent out a barrage of nasty, even inaccurate flyers, those big flyers you get in the mail. So we decided, well, we need to get Curt's face and name out there before these flyers come out. And that's what we did. It was actually very effective. So there was a lot of planning that went into this door-to-door campaign. And also Curt snapped a picture of the walk list that I had used in Wisconsin and redevised the walk lists to make them a lot more effective. So that was really the impetus behind the door-to-door campaign. So number three would be to stay on message. You decide what your top 3 issues are and you stick with those. So you don't want people to hear your name with 1, 2, or 3 issues and all of a sudden you're talking about something not really important or off the wall. So staying on message was very important, and Curt did a really good job with that, actually.
So I want to go back to the door-to-door.
Okay.
My impression is that that's what you brought to the table that wasn't really thought about in the years before. And I'm sure someone taught you that, but in my mind, you were the one that came from Wisconsin to say, hey, if you want to win, here's what you have to do. And we're talking about massively, like how many people do you think, how many doors do you think him or his team, touched? What are we talking about?
Thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Yeah, but really, the plan was you had a list of likely Republican voters. That's what you were targeting. You weren't trying to target just anybody.
Right, they were Republican primary voters.
Yeah,
because we got that information from the county clerk's offices.
Right, and so the intent was really to call on all of those, right?
Right, it was a very targeted, focused campaign.
Yeah, and I can just tell you that, from what I hear,
before you, I'm sorry, make your comment. People who aren't familiar with this, when we say door to door, we mean we actually knocked on a person's door and talked with them.
Yeah.
The other thing that I did that many people have since copied was we put a sticky note on the brochure that said, "Sorry, I missed you, Curt." Right. Exactly. So they knew that the candidate himself had been there.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And really, Curt has kept that up. I mean, that's the only year he's done that. And I can tell you that there's people that would say, I've been waiting for you.
Yes. Yes, they said, I've been waiting for you. I was wondering when you were going to come by.
Yeah.
That's a good feeling.
That goes back to something that I wrote about in this last campaign. Some of us were nervous that it seemed like there wasn't a lot of effort or money being spent to win the campaign. But at this stage, you have such momentum and such name-to-name recognition, I guess.
Right.
that it's very hard to defeat somebody that's done all of that work.
Exactly. I mean, you really lay the groundwork for name recognition. You also, especially if it's your first campaign, it gives you the opportunity to see the district,
Yeah.
to see it directly with your own eyes, so you can see what the problems are. And
back in 2014, there were many of us that went out with Curt and would do that. Some of us would go out without Curt, but you went out with Curt an awful lot. I mean, this was a huge commitment on your part to actually do the walking, do the knocking, and being with Curt.
right, I mean, it was worth the investment and time, and I think I might have inspired him, because I know he relates the story of it. We were in Leesburg and it was sleeting. I mean, it was horrible weather. And I just said, well, let's keep on going. And he said, since I kept on going, he couldn't very well say, well, we're not gonna keep on going.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was very impressive to see him work. And I
Mhm.
think that also helped inspire some of our volunteers to see the candidate out there working.
Yeah.
And I remember that March, we were recovering from a big snowstorm. And I clearly remember one day where we were walking, it may have been Leesburg or North Webster, and the snow was piled on the sides of the road. And we had to walk down the middle of the road to get to the houses. But it gives you,
Yeah.
contact with the voters, inspiring stories you can relate on Facebook, and when you go to events and you can say, Mary in North Webster is worried about increasing taxes and things like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah. So when did you think this is the right guy? Did you know that immediately? Did you think, hey, let's give it a shot, see what happens? Was there a moment when it clicked for you to say, this guy is going to stay fast? That's what I'm really getting at. When did you know that this guy was rock solid and was going to do what he said he was going to do?
I think when the meeting with John Elliott occurred, and it was obvious he put a lot of work into organizing the campaign and he thought about it.
Mhm.
That was really when it clicked for me.
Okay. Okay. So I want to bring us to then, he's now in Indy. It's 2015, and Governor Pence proposes, I don't know, he doesn't propose, but the whole RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is the big topic. And there's a great signing service kind of in his office, Governor Pence's office. The thing is signed, and then we'll just say it, all hell breaks loose.
Right.
He's interviewed on ABC with somebody, whoever that was.
Stephanopoulos.
Yeah. And that just went about as bad as it could go. And then by the time that weekend, probably before the weekend started, he's telling his people, we got to fix this. And then that week, there's all kinds of pressure to vote for this fix. So now pick up the story and help us understand what Curt wrestled with and how you coached him in that week, because Curt was one of the few people that voted correctly.
Right. So let me just lay a little background. So basically what had happened was they passed a bill, and then because of external pressure, they fixed the bill. Now, it isn't common for a legislature to pass a fix of a bill, but it's not unheard of. And I remember when I was in the state Senate in Wisconsin, and we were discussing some bill in caucus, and they said, well, we might end up having to tweak this bill. So sometimes it does happen that the legislature has to tweak a bill if it turns out to not work, or some new evidence comes about that shows that the bill is bad. But in this instance, there was no new evidence that showed that the bill was bad. There was simply a lot of screaming and shouting on the side of the left. And that's unfortunately what they're good at. And the question is, do you resist screaming and shouting? Do you pull a asbestos blanket over yourself and let it pass? or do you yield to the pressure? Now, I remember at the time being rather confused as to why they looked like they were going to cave. And I did a little bit of research at the time and went back and looked at some of the newspaper articles about the bill in the like the Indy Star and that kind of thing. And I remember reading that the chamber was opposed to the RFRA bill, the original bill.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, okay, you know that some people that supposedly support you are about to oppose you. And it didn't make sense to me, and I still haven't been able to figure it out, why they were so completely unprepared for the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no excuse for that. And the only thing I can think of is that, is it because of this supermajority that they're used to living in this bubble?
Hmm.
And that's speculation. I just don't know.
Mhm.
So I don't remember. So all of this was going on. There was tremendous pressure in the caucus, meaning his fellow state reps to vote for the RFRA fix. And so, and backing up a little bit, I also blame some of the problem on weak leadership. Pence wasn't able to defend his own bill.
Right.
And the leadership weren't able to defend their own bill. And I always think, if you vote for a bill, you should be able to defend your vote as a legislator. So why couldn't these legislators defend their vote?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that, like I said, it goes back to the supermajority and them just not having to have to defend a vote.
Well, okay, so let me ask a question related to that. I don't want to get you off track, but that the grassroots was so strongly behind the bill that the legislators didn't really, fully embrace the bill. They just wanted to make the grassroots people happy. So they vote for the bill, not really having the conviction of the bill. So
that's possible.
Yeah, I don't know enough. I wasn't that deep into all of that, but I know there was a very strong grassroots movement that made that whole thing happen.
Right, I agree. And maybe you're right that they just voted for it without much commitment to it.
Mm-hmm.
And just thought it would slide by or whatever. But
yeah, I don't know.
Obviously it didn't turn out that way. So
yeah.
If you've never been in the legislature, it's hard to understand what people mean when they talk about a caucus, but it's where you meet with your fellow legislators, whether it's the House caucus or the Senate caucus. And to have your fellow Republicans pressuring you to vote a certain way is tremendous pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like in Wisconsin when we were battling the unions, where you have a sense of camaraderie because you're doing the right thing and you're all in it together and you stand together. When you're in a party caucus and most of the people around you are against, they're saying you got to vote for the RFRA fix. It's hard to stand up to that.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I don't remember if Curt called me or if I called him. I remember where I was standing in my house at the bottom of the stairs in the hallway. And you used the word coach, you're being too kind to me. I basically told him there was no way he could vote for the RFRA fix.
Yeah.
There comes a time, and you have to have insight and experience to know that it's a line in the sand moment. And that was a line in the sand moment. And so he voted the right way. And I remember, I think it was that night that I called Brad, the sheriff in Elkhart County.
Rogers.
Yeah, Brad Rogers, to send a car out to Curt's house to make sure that protesters didn't show up, which they didn't, probably because the bill passed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing to harass him about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to fill in a few details because I know this story. So Curt is leaning towards voting for the fix. He told Dan Teagley that he was going to vote for the fix. Dan talked to him, and Dan hung up and called you.
Oh, okay.
And Dan said he's going to vote for the fix. Dan tried to talk him out of it. And it's not that Curt doesn't listen to Dan.
Right.
That's when you called him and didn't give him a choice.
Well, like I said, it's a line in the sand moment.
Yeah.
And there was no evidence to vote for the RFRA fix. It was purely political pressure.
Yeah.
So do you stand up to the pressure or do you cave to the pressure?
Yeah. And so our breakfast group, Brian Spillman and Terry and I, it was probably later that week that we were with Curt. If not, it was the next week. But when we met with him for breakfast, he was still visibly shell-shocked.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't comprehend what was really happening. It was such an emotional experience that he had gone through that even when the session was over, it was like, I don't know what to think. It took him several months to decompose and process, what happened.
I bet. I mean, it's
Yeah.
horrible. It's horrible to be under that kind of pressure, that national spotlight, pressure in your own caucus. To be an outsider in your own caucus is a very bad feeling.
Now, I can't, I don't speak for Curt, but I can't say what he mentioned was the bill prior to that. When we were talking about it just last week or the week before, he said his watershed moment wasn't RFRA. And that surprised me because Curt and I had talked about that before. It was a very defining moment, but he said there was a significant vote prior to that really affirmed for him, what track to be on. But I think what I want to say for our listeners is that there's something special here about the relationship that you had with Curt. And I also want our listeners to recognize that although I joke and use the Batman theme, he's not a superhero.
Well, he's a
just
human being.
Normal guy.
Yeah.
And he told me later, like when we met that fall, he said he had no idea when he voted the way he did against that fix, that catapulted him into a leadership role among Liberty people. And
right.
I'm not talking us, I'm talking other representatives, that when the fall came and people are now talking to Curt, what are we going to do next? And what should we do here? He found himself in a role that he wasn't expecting, but because he had voted on the right side of Liberty,
right.
Now he was one of the few people who could really lead.
Right. And I think it's a good thing in a way that happened early on in his career.
Yeah.
Because he obviously is the right person to lead the cause of liberty, and people should be looking up to him.
So what I think from my side of the experience is Dan Teely has said to me that our breakfast group is like insulation for him.
Right. That's good.
And it's not just us. We have a very active community of activists that have personal relationships with Curt. So he goes down to Indy and gets kind of beat up or whatever, and he comes back here and he finds lots of support and accountability, I would say, etc. But is that common in your experience with politicians, that they have those kinds of relationships that keep them on track?
Probably not. And probably the longer they stay in office, they lose perspective. They lose track of their district, and they get focused on what's immediately around them, which is Indianapolis.
Yeah.
What people are saying in Indianapolis. And I remember one thing that kept me connected. First of all, I didn't like Madison. It's just full of liberals. We called it Planet Madison. And so I loved going back to my district, and I could feel my blood pressure dropping as I got closer to my district. And part of the problem that we're talking about of becoming disconnected is that most of your staff members are from Indianapolis. Maybe not all, maybe it's not as bad here in Indiana as it was in Wisconsin, but my chief of staff was from Madison, and she would get all bent out of shape and wave a Milwaukee or Madison newspaper at me and point at something, and I would look at her and say, there is not a single person in any tavern in my district that cares about that. So
yeah,
the more connected you stay with your district and go to the parades and the chicken dinners and the town halls or whatever, the better off you are.
Yeah.
Because those are the people that support you.
Right. All right. So now I want to fast forward several years to a year ago. So it was probably the middle of March when I called you. And I was caught up in this whole COVID thing. I was listening to a PhD from Duke University who, who saw all of this happening in January. So he had the right vision in January as to what was going to happen with COVID, but he was of the opinion that masks were super important. And so I called you and we talked because I was trying to get a conversation with Curt, which I did have later, but I talked to you first. And you were rock solid really a year ago in saying the same things that you say today. Now, we haven't talked about it recently, but what I'm trying to say is lots of us have gravitated towards your position that I was seeing in March. And so I guess what my question is, I don't want to, I know maybe I'm assuming too much. Maybe you should say what your position is, but my real question is, how did you get it right last March when people are just now beginning to get it right?
Well, prior to this coronavirus situation, outside of the clinical setting, the only people who wore masks generally were either people who had a diagnosed respiratory infection like tuberculosis. That's to prevent the particles from infecting other people, or people who were immunocompromised to protect them from getting infections. So there had never been any evidence that showed that masks were effective for stopping viral infections. And I had meant to pull out an article I had at the time that showed that there is no controlled trial. So one group of people wears the mask, the other don't wear the mask. There were controlled trials. I'm doing this from memory now, which is bad. But there were controlled trials that showed that masks were ineffective. And to me, it just seemed obvious from the beginning that it was a power grab and a way of manipulating people's behavior. And when you look at human behavior, people can be very easily manipulated when they're frightened, when they don't have a lot of information. Uncertainty breeds fear. And so to me, it just seemed obvious that it was a way of controlling people because they didn't have any evidence that the masks were going to help. And the other thing that struck me from the beginning was that all of these mandates from the CDC were guesswork. So March was a Sunday in the middle of March where the CDC issued guidelines saying that you shouldn't gather in groups of more than 50 people. So less than 24 hours later, the Trump administration said you can't aggregate in groups of more than 10 people. So there is no progress in scientific understanding that we learned about the coronavirus in those less than 24 hours. It was just guesstimates. Now, sometimes guesstimates aren't always bad in that kind of situation, but it certainly was very bad for the country.
Yeah. So how is it, Pam, that there are PhD people and let's say MDs and nurses. I mean, I personally interact with all of those people who have those kinds of degrees, and they're absolutely certain that you should wear a mask. You know, they think that you're gonna, I don't know, kill somebody or something if you don't.
Right.
But then I have other people who are just as educated, who are at the other end, you know, saying like what you said. So how do you perceive that when you see these smart, educated people who are saying the opposite of what you're saying? How do you explain that?
Well, for people who are pro-mask, I think some of them are relying on models, but models are just conjecture. So just like the people who advocate for the concept of global warming use models, it's not, that isn't science. So that's probably where some of them are coming from. I think some MDs and nurses are coming, they're pro-mask, are coming at it from the perspective that they buy into this authority, that they buy into Fauci proclaiming that masks are effective and then not thinking beyond it, especially when it comes to nurses. Nurses, I don't think, have as much training in infectious disease as most MDs. But there's something about this I was going to say, and then I lost my train of thought.
Did you help coach Curt during that time?
I think Chris did.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think Chris.
I mean,
Chris
you
is
need to
more
say
in
that, your
tune.
husband.
Yeah, my husband Chris,
Yeah.
who is also a doctor,
Yeah,
and
there
he's
you
still
go.
practicing, so he's
Yeah.
a lot more in tune to this.
Yeah.
He's really paid a lot closer attention than I have to things like preventative therapies, like vitamins and zinc and things like that. But what I was about to say, where I lost my train of thought, is the thing as a medical doctor that bothers me the most about this entire situation is that as doctors, we are discouraged from questioning authority. We're discouraged from questioning Fauci. There was a doctor, an MD in Oregon, whose license was at least temporarily revoked, and I don't know what ultimately happened to him because he spoke out against the current thinking on the coronavirus. Now, the reason that bothers me that we're not allowed to question is that the vast majority of advances in medical science have occurred by questioning the status quo. How else do we improve medical care?
Right.
Other than questioning the status quo. And, doctors are criticized for promoting vitamins and zinc and even hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
And what's so hypocritical is usually the left or people in public health, all they talk about is preventative, preventative, preventative. And that was how Obamacare was promoted to the public, was, oh, now you're going to have all this more money for preventative, as if weren't already recommending preventative care to people. So now, instead of emphasizing preventative, they're emphasizing these expensive therapies, which may have a role, but why downplay the preventative?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
And I don't want to go down this road very far, but my impression is maybe it's because of your political experience, seeing, politics being used in medicine, the overlap. I think when we talked a year ago, you had some personal experience with some of the people that we see on TV who were the public health people.
Oh, yes.
And you were very skeptical of following their advice. So you were in a different position than someone here, let's say in Warsaw, who's never been involved in politics, never seen the political abuse of healthcare, has no relationship with the people they're seeing on TV, who then are speaking with authority as if they're right. And when I talked to you, I was very surprised that you were extremely skeptical of who we were listening to on TV.
Yes. Would you like me to name names?
It's up to you.
Well, one is a Surgeon General. Jerome
Yeah.
Adams, who I had worked with on committees at the Indiana State Medical Association. And he always struck me as a liberal. He didn't seem to have a lot of real world experience. And the other was Seema Verma, who was put in charge of Medicare. Now, I don't think she had a big role, although I think she was at some of those news conferences, and she's basically a bean counter. So yeah,
So what was your impression? I don't want to like gossip, but what was your impression of Pence as he led this group? So you probably saw the press briefings, whether that was daily or whatever it was. There was a lot of those. And here's Pence, who doesn't know anything about this stuff, really guiding kind of this whole team. Any comments about that? Did that raise any red flags to you?
I would say the chicken came home to roost for appointing Jerome Adams. And it also kind of, I don't know Fauci's job description, but it seemed odd that he took center stage and why it wasn't Jerome, the Surgeon General. And also I think that they gave Fauci too much leeway behind the microphone. I think that was a big mistake. I think his messaging, his initial messaging frightened people when he didn't have to. Like, you needed somebody to kind of give pep talks. And I don't remember hearing a lot of pep talks. Like, rah, rah, we're going to get through this. Medical science will prevail. We'll find solutions. You know, you need to put a positive, you need to be realistic, but you can't keep continuing the pessimistic tone, which I think is part of the problem that we're falling into now, when people who've had the vaccine are being told they still need to wear masks.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, at some point this has to end.
Yeah. All right. So I want to move on if you're ready to move on.
Sure.
Let's talk about the Nisly-Jacob resolution to end the emergency. What I want to know from you as someone who's been a state, senator in Wisconsin, very involved politically, what do you see happening here? Why is it that this can't get done? Maybe that's a good question. So here we are, they proposed it in November. We're still, the last I heard as of a couple days ago, maybe there's 21 people now in the House that think this is a good idea. How do you explain the fact that we don't have it already done?
I think it's because of cronyism and people thinking of themselves as Republicans rather than defenders of liberty. So in order, first of all, the governor's not going to want his emergency powers ended. So that means it's up to the Senate and House leadership to get the bill passed. It's not going to pass without the support of leadership. And obviously they don't, for whatever reason, want to stand up to him. And I imagine if he were a Democrat governor, they would stand up to him.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the irony of it.
Yeah.
But that's, it's also part of a general trend, unfortunately, and Chris has talked about this in some of his broadcasts, is there's been a general trend over the years for legislatures to cede power to the executive branch. And I think that's a good example of what we're seeing here. Because I just can't imagine, I mean, Indiana is a conservative state. I just can't imagine that there's people, willing to buy into this still.
So I said this recently, that if we had 51 in the House, if we had 51 representatives that were barbers, beauticians, waiters, waitresses, gym owners, and restaurant owners, that resolution would have passed in November.
Right. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah. So how do you explain that, we have 100 representatives in the House, they all have districts with all of those people in them. And yet we only have 21 out of 100 that are interested at this moment in ending. But every one of them has restaurants they go to, beauticians, et cetera, who, if they were voting, it probably would have been done in November. How do you explain that?
Disconnects with the district, like we talked about before. Party cronyism, not having the guts to stand up to leadership, which, you know, legislators ought to be able to do that. And skipping ahead, I'm going to kind of skip ahead to one of your other questions about if I could wave a magic wand, what would I change?
Exactly. Right.
Well, one of the things that I would change would be, this would be my number one, is to end the caucusing in process in Indiana. So if you've only been politically active in the state of Indiana, that's the only thing that you think of is how legislators who leave in the middle of their term get replaced. But in Wisconsin and other states, if that happens, the governor calls a special election. So at least the person has to go in front of the voters. And I remember Dan Teely once saying that he did some research and a third of the legislators were caucused in. So that is just ripe for cronyism. So, because basically people can pick their replacement. Now you're going to say, people are going to say, well, they're voted on by their precinct committee man. But if you went to Walmart and asked 100 people who their precinct committee man is, nobody would know.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big disconnect with people, and I'm making a bit of a generalization. So maybe the people that get caucused in can be close to their constituents, but basically they've gotten where they are because they did somebody a favor or somebody did a favor for them. It's just, for lack of a better term, cronyism. So you have a setup for a bigger disconnect between the representative and the voters.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, let's talk about constitutional carry.
Okay.
Of all the people I could talk to and say, hey, you know, tell me what's happening here. You're the one I would want to talk to. So maybe you should give us that background. You gave us your medical background. Help our listeners know what your experience is with guns. Okay.
Well, my personal experience is at one point I was a NRA certified instructor in basic pistol, which unfortunately I kind of let lapse. But legislatively, well, let me back up a little bit. When I ran for the state Senate in Wisconsin, it became immediately apparent that the issue of concealed carry was important to the voters, because at that point they didn't have concealed carry in Wisconsin. So that was a huge issue. So when I became elected, I sponsored the concealed carry bill in Wisconsin. That was huge. And it was a good bill. It wasn't constitutional carry, but it was a good bill. There were relatively few places in the state of Wisconsin where you couldn't carry concealed. And the Department of Motor Vehicles had no access to whether or not you had a concealed carry permit. It was, the licensing was through the Department of Justice. So anyway, my passion is about self-defense as a God-given right. So remember, the Second Amendment doesn't grant you the permit to carry. It says that the federal government can't infringe it. And also the Indiana Constitution says in section 32, the people shall have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. So it's right there. So, so there shouldn't be any licenses on a right. Once you get the government involved and they start issuing licenses, you can have all kinds of monkey shines. So why is constitutional carry important? Well, because then you don't have to get a license. You don't have to pay for a license, which some people, you know, if they have to pay $50 for a license, that they may not be able to get the license. But some people may not even be aware that governments, some state governments, instead of having a shall issue where an applicant for a license license has to be issued that license unless they're a felon or something like that. Some states have, like New York, have what's called may issue, where the sheriff may decide or may not decide to issue a permit.
Wow.
So that's what I mean by when the government gets involved, all kinds of monkey shines can come into play. So the Second Amendment, or I should say our God-given right to defend ourselves, is our last line of defense between us and tyranny. If we don't have that right protected or left uninfringed, then we become subject to a tyrannical government. And just look around the world for examples. So that's my background as far as concealed carry goes. So getting to the bill itself, I took some notes. The positive aspects of it is it repeals the law that requires a person to obtain a license to carry a handgun in Indiana, and that's good. It also allows a resident of Indiana who wants to carry a firearm in another state under a reciprocity agreement entered into by Indiana in another state to obtain a reciprocity license. So that is important for a lot of people. So that's good. Now, getting to the bad points. Now, let me back up a little bit. This is not what's considered a clean concealed carry bill. It's weighted down with some things which I'm about to get into. And when you see that, it shows, so remember that actions always speak louder than words, including when it comes to legislators. So if they start tacking these things on, it means that they either don't really understand the concept of permitless carry or they don't buy into it. And when I heard that Ben Smaltz was involved with this, I was instantly demoralized. I knew we weren't going to get a good product. But it's not totally bad, but there are some bad things. The effective date is March 2022, which I don't understand. So it's going to take a year for it to take effect. It also creates some kind of database, databases are always bad. And the worst is that it requires permits on land managed by the DNR. So if you go camping, fishing, hiking, that kind of thing, visiting state parks, and you're not aware that it has that requirement, you could end up in serious trouble. Now, I would say that many people who carry concealed are likely to visit DNR properties. Not everybody, but they kind of go together. So I think that's a big mistake. I'm hoping that gets taken out in the Senate, but I haven't heard any evidence or discussion that it is going to be.
Yeah. Okay. So talk about the politics of that just a little bit, because I wasn't really following the bill that closely. I knew it was happening, but when I heard a radio program where the gun guy was interviewing Ben Smaltz, what I started to recognize was Ben and a group of other people were being hailed for accomplishing this great bill. And they were also hailing the NRA as being really key in what was happening. And they were speaking very negatively of gun owners of America. And they were speaking negatively of other representatives who challenged this database idea. Okay, so of course, the people who were running the program had their particular view and they were maximizing that view. But help us understand this. The Gun Owners of America would say on their website that they've helped 18 states pass what we might consider to be clean constitutional carry bills. Does the NRA have that kind of accolade? Is the NRA responsible for constitutional carry getting done?
I don't think so. Well, and that's a great question, because when I was trying to get concealed carry passed in Wisconsin, I actually proposed two bills, one that was a shall issue bill and one that was a constitutional carry bill. Now, the NRA lobbyist who came out at the time to testify at the public hearing said that they would support both bills. But later, when, I don't know if you get the NRA's publication that comes out every month, when the fight for concealed carry was written up, there was an article in their magazine about the fight for constitution or concealed carry in Wisconsin. They said in the article that the fight for concealed carry got off to a rocky start when constitutional carry was proposed. So they were really not honest when they said they supported both bills. But getting back to your question, I don't think that the NRA has actually, and I could be wrong, but I don't think they've really been behind a constitutional carry bill. And now you mentioned Gun Owners of America. Do you really mean National Association for Gun Rights?
No,
I think National Association for Gun Rights is the one that's behind the constitutional carry bills.
okay.
But it could be Gun Owners of America.
It is Gun Owners of America.
Okay, well, Gun Owners of America and National Association for Gun Rights are considered much stronger in terms of defending the Second Amendment and promoting constitutional carry.
Yeah.
Than the NRA.
Yeah.
The NRA has been behind, I think they're actually behind the federal background checks that passed back in the 80s. And they've taken some weak stands on anti-Second Amendment issues that have come in front of the Supreme Court. So,
Okay.
you're frozen.
Yeah, I think it's coming through, but there is a freezing part.
Are we about to time out?
Oh, we're getting close, and I know our time is up too. So let's see if we can wrap up. Okay, last question. Where do you see us in Indiana in this liberty movement? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 is some ideal thing that I don't even know what it would be. But let's say 1 is California, Michigan, Illinois, New York. Where are we in this kind of liberty spectrum? And what do you think we need in Indiana to move us further towards a 10?
I think we need to focus more on local and state elections. I don't think that we're going to make any movement on the federal level. And if we strengthen what's going on at the state level, I think that with horrible things coming out of the federal government, we need to work on strengthening our ability to nullify bad bills coming out of the federal government. So don't try to primary, our US senators like Todd Young. That's a waste of time. I think we're stuck with our US senators and congressmen, so that's not really where we should focus our energy. It should all be on state level politics.
Yeah.
And I would rank the state of Indiana a 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Largely because of what's happened in the past year with Eric Holcomb shutting the state down, abusing his executive power, and then the state legislature not doing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very troubling.
Yeah. Yeah. Pam, thank you so much. I want to pray here for you. And but before I do that, I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
I think it's been very helpful. So
thank you.
What I'm trying to do is help educate our prayer partners so that we can pray more effectively. And the more we know about this kind of stuff, the more we're able to know how to pray. So let's go.
Good.
God, thanks so much for this story, for how you brought Pam to Indiana just really 2 years before Curt ran. And we thank you for the relationship that they have, for how she helped direct him at a time when he desperately needed direction, and then how that put him on a track of who he is today and the leadership role that he has today. So we thank you for Curt, we thank you for John, we thank as we're here on a Wednesday night, we pray that tomorrow would be a spectacular day for them, that they would once again get the ideas that they need and see you helping them to accomplish what would be your will. We think liberty is your will. And we think we're a long ways from seeing that accomplished in many of these areas. So we thank you for our country, thank you for the opportunity we have, that we the people are really who are in charge, and give us wisdom and boldness as we deal with politicians who need to follow we the people. Thanks for Pam and her husband Chris and all that they do, for so much investment that they've made in this process of Indiana and liberty. We thank you for that. We ask this in Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
All right, thanks Pam.
Thank you, Brad. Have a wonderful evening.
You too, thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.